to a Q&A for about another 90 minutes. At that point, you will begin to give your questions to Maxwell Graff, and he will act as moderator, putting you in a queue, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can in that time period. So I'd like to introduce Tim Faith. Tim is a Maryland intellectual property attorney. He focuses on technology and business law, and he teaches as an adjunct professor and is the incoming president-elect of the SL Bar Association. So Tim, thank you so much for being here. And Agenda Faramet is a privacy and internet law attorney in San Francisco. She's a frequent speaker for the American Bar Association on the subject of best practices in terms of service and privacy policy construction. She is also a former executive member of the SL Bar Association. Juris Amat, unfortunately, can't get on the sim, and she's going to keep working and working until maybe someone crashes and she can slip in that little spot, that little window. But Juris is the founder of the Virtual Intellectual Property Organization. She's an international intellectual property and media law attorney in Croatia, and she has served on the executive board of the SL Bar Association. And I'm also honored to announce that Juris is also taken the lead of the UCCSL legal tactical team. I think I've covered everything. Just a reminder, keep your mics off. You've been wonderful with that, and we really appreciate it. And glad you're all here. We are also, I do need to announce too that we are live streaming, and we are being videoed with Machinima. So if anyone is here with a girlfriend, not your wife, you might want to move to another seat. I think that covers everything. And we will get started, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our wonderful panel.
Thank you, Kylie. Awesome. Do I have my slides up? Oh, Kylie, can you raise my slides for me?
Will do.
Yay. I will have slides in a minute. So, hi, everyone. I'm Agenda, and first off, I know that this is a controversial topic right now, and I kind of feel like half the people here are maybe here with pitchforks and torches ready to lead the revolution against Linden Lab for the terms of service change, and half the people here are really just kind of hoping that someone will tell us that it's all okay and that there really isn't anything to worry about. And I'm afraid that I'm probably not going to make any of you happy because the answer is somewhere in the middle. Because I'm a lawyer, and the answer is always somewhere in the middle.
Agenda, I can't
Yep.
grab them. I don't have the edit right, so see if you can reach back and grab them.
That's very weird, because I didn't change it. Hang on just a second. Ta-da! Slides.
Awesome.
Okay. Go a little higher. The slides will be available online, online as soon as we are done, and will be available in the Second Life Bar Association's main office, again, as soon as we're done. I'll put them up, and I'll post links, kind of all over the place. Okay, so also, as I think Kylie mentioned, we're recording, and we're going to try to get a transcript available. I know we've got a few hearing impaired members with us, and I'm already talking to some people who have volunteered to make transcripts from the recording, so we're working on that. So anyway, first, we're going to talk about, a lot of the rights that we're talking about here are copyright rights. And so we're going to talk about what exactly we mean by copyright. And then we're going to talk about the terms that show up in terms of use and what exactly they're claiming in a terms of use. And then we're going to look at what terms are normal in a terms of use, and I know that a lot of people have posted some other terms of use, maybe from OpenSim or whatever, But we're going to look at some of the other terms of use that we see a lot in social media. And then we're going to take a close look at the Second Life terms of use once we have kind of a grounding. And then we're going to look at where we go from here. And then Tim and I are going to start talking about kind of where we go from here once we know what the playing field looks like. So let's look at copyright. So we talk about copyright a lot, but what exactly copyright means is when you create something, when you are a content creator, you are granted exclusive rights over your work. And those rights are the right to make copies, the right to share or transfer or distribute those copies, the right to modify or adapt those copies, or the work, sorry. The right to publicly perform those works. So if it's music, or if it's a movie or a drama, the right to publicly perform it, or publicly display, the right to display those works in public. And exclusive means that nobody gets to do any of those things unless you give them permission. But when we look at the internet generally involves all of those rights. In order to transfer something across the internet, you've got to make a copy of it. You've got to transfer it across the internet. You've got to be able to modify it to make in Google you see thumbnails. And so those are actually modifications of the actual work. You've got to be able to publicly perform something in YouTube. You've got to be able to display works on, in a browser or what have you, or a viewer. And so these are implicated all across the internet. And so when someone creates something, you've got to be able to give your rights, or at least license your rights, give permission to your rights to many, many different entities across the internet. And we're used to doing that. It's okay. This is common. So we see license terms. And when you license something, you're just giving permission. So a non-exclusive license just means it doesn't belong to one party. It means that you're giving license to this person and this person and this person, and that's not the only person that gets to do something with your stuff. Perpetual, the permission does not end. It goes forever. Worldwide is kind of obvious. Irrevocable is you can't take it back. Once you give permission, you don't get to say, give it back. You're not, you don't get to have permission anymore. Royalty-free, it means the person that has permission doesn't owe you any money. Sub-licensable, so when you give somebody permission to do a whole bunch of things, that person can then turn around to someone else and say, all right, well, you get to do, X, Y, and Z to this content, even without the permission of the creator. Transferable is, we all sort of know what transfer means. And limited or unlimited is kind of self-explanatory, but we'll see in a minute exactly what that means, because that's really important in a second. And then, this license ends. We really want to see when this license ends. That's important. So, normally, we will see that a terms of use contains IP licenses both ways, because you have to be able to use Facebook's intellectual property. You have to see it on your computer, and then they have to see your stuff on their servers. And a properly, a well-written intellectual property license is limited. It's limited in purpose, it's limited in term, and it's limited in scope. And the reason people are angry right now is because not all terms of service and intellectual property licenses are well written. So let's take a look at some. Most of us are familiar with Flickr. So Flickr, you'll see that Yahoo does not claim ownership of content, so your content is your own. And, excuse me. So your content is your own, and you grant Yahoo a worldwide, royalty-free, and non-exclusive license, and that's common. They need the worldwide, excuse me, they need the worldwide license because Yahoo is visible worldwide. They need royalty-free because Yahoo doesn't want to pay you every time you put something up on Flickr. And they need non-exclusive because Yahoo doesn't want exclusive license over your content. If Yahoo had exclusive license over your content, then Yahoo would be the only person that ever got to use your content, including you. So non-exclusive is a good thing. So Yahoo wants the license to use, distribute, reproduce, modify, adapt, publicly perform, and publicly display your content. Yahoo wants to do all of those things, and it has to. But Yahoo wants to limit it. It wants to use it only for the purpose that the content was submitted or made available. And it only wants to do it as long as you continue to include the content on the services. So as soon as you take it off the services, the license ends. You're done. And that's a good license. That's a really friendly license. Facebook's not quite as friendly. This is great. That's not loading for me, but let's just say that Facebook's, this is not at all loading for me. Facebook's is not quite as friendly. It's you give Facebook a non-exclusive, worldwide, sub-licensable, royalty-free license. But the good thing about Facebook is that Facebook's license ends when you take your content off the service. The bad thing about that is it only ends if you have not shared it with anyone. So if you have shared it with someone, and it's Facebook, so of course you've shared it with someone, your license never ends. And Facebook's terms of service used to allow you to actually end your license. And in 2009, they removed that. Now, your permission never ends if you have shared content with others. That's Facebook. TwitPic is evil. TwitPic is evil. You grant TwitPic the same kind of license that you grant to pretty much anyone, and you do it for the purpose of promoting or redistributing part or all of the service, which can be a gotcha. But interesting is that if you post content on TwitPic, you are required, and someone else wants to use your content, they are required to get permission from TwitPic, not from you, and to credit TwitPic, which is a little weird. So that's the evil of TwitPic. And LinkedIn is also fairly evil. So LinkedIn requires not only the ability to use and commercialize in any way known or future discovered, they want to use and commercialize not just your content, but your ideas, concepts, techniques, or data. So if you have a business idea that you post to LinkedIn, LinkedIn can take it, use it, and commercialize it. So these are the kinds of things we're all worked up about Second Life's terms of service, which are not great, but these are the kinds of evil things that are out there in very commonly used social media. We see these every day. So now let's look at the Second Life terms of service. So we'll go one by one. First, you retain intellectual property rights that you already hold. Peachy. If you already have the rights to your content, you own your content. That doesn't necessarily mean, that you can stop anybody from doing anything in it if you're giving away all the permissions in it. So let's keep going. You can only upload content if you have the permission to do so. Neither of these have changed. So this next one has not changed. Linden Lab won't pay you for the use of your works. Again, that's not uncommon. This next one is, I think, the worst change. I know everybody is up in arms about the big section, but this is the one that drives me crazy. Linden Lab may sue third parties in your name, and you irrevocably appoint Linden Lab as your attorney in fact for these actions. Do I want the person that wrote these terms of service to act as my attorney in fact? Hell no. But since I agreed to these terms of service, that's what's happening, and that makes me very sad. So now let's talk about this. So you grant Linden Lab the right to use your content, and it's non-exclusive, so it doesn't only belong to Linden Lab. This is fine. It's worldwide. It's perpetual. It is unrestricted, unconditional, unlimited, irrevocable, perpetual, and that's terrible. Linden Lab can use your content for any purpose whatsoever, and that's not great. That's what has people up in arms, is that this is so absolutely unlimited. We see in here things like disclose, sell, resell, and you see that those weren't in my discussion of copyright rights. Don't be freaked out by that. Those are, I don't even know why those are in there. Those are not copyright rights. Those are patent rights and trade secret rights, and I really just think that that was sloppy drafting. The short version is, even if those weren't in there, they can still sell and resell your copyrighted stuff. So, how do we make it better? We need to find a way to convince Linden Lab to limit the purpose for which their content can be used, limit the term of their license, and limit the scope of their license. That's the best case scenario, is this unlimited stuff. This isn't working. And that's really why we're here. Where does this leave us? We can keep going with the every man for himself, where people are pulling their content and fleeing the service. This kind of puts us in an Instagram situation where in December of last year, Instagram made a terms of service change, and by January, a month later, they had dropped from 16.35 million users to 7.42 million users in 1 month. They had lost half of their active daily users in a month, and Instagram freaked out and revised their terms of service. But their revision didn't last, and they ended up basically claiming the same rights that they had, that the controversial terms of service claimed in the first place. So all of the concern was, all of the gain was for nothing. We can take a hostile solution. We can send complaints to the FTC, and we can try for a class action lawsuit, which isn't going to get anywhere because of the arbitration clause. We can look for a peaceful solution, and I think that's the best way to go. And that's what I've got, and I think now it's Tim's turn.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for spending the Saturday morning or afternoon with us to talk a little bit about this topic. I'm the president-elect of the SL Bar Association, and there was a question earlier from one of the audience members just to explain what SL Bar Association is about, so I'll do that real quick. We're a group of attorneys and other people that are either in the legal community as paralegals, or that work in the legal community, or just simply are interested in the legal world. We have our own sim, and we meet periodically to talk with each other. We put on these kinds of presentations to the public about various legal topics. And I guess, I don't know if we'll be taking an advocacy role. It sounds like others are already working in the lead on that, but I tend to agree with the agenda. I think that we're all in Second Life, and I think Second Life may have overreached a little bit with what they're doing with this copyright terms of service. And so maybe we all ought to give them a hard time about that. But that's sort of what SL Bar Association's about. If you're interested in learning more about it, you're welcome to instant message or get in touch with me or Agenda or one of the other folks that's a member, several of whom are in the room here. Of the Bar Association. So about me, so I am an attorney. I work in Maryland in private practice. I teach part-time. One of the teaching positions I have part-time is at Maryland Institute College of Art. I'm actually, my undergraduate degree is in painting. I graduated from MICA back in the 90s. So like many of you, I'm an artist. Even though I don't practice art anymore, I'm a practicing attorney. But I guess this changing in terms of service and just the overall impact of technology on our rights, that's something I'm personally interested in and in trying to help people sort it out. I teach intellectual property at Maryland Institute to artists, many of whom are trying to start art businesses, which is not unlike what some of you are doing here in Second Life. All the students I had last semester are real-life art businesses, but in a lot of ways it's really no different if you're in here trying to make a living off of your creative output. And so the issues with copyright, I think copyright might be the most important intellectual property right that artists have, even though there are trade secrets and trademarks and patents and other sorts of rights, but I think copyright's sort of front and center. And of course, that's really what the big change is here with the terms of service from Linden Labs. It has to primarily do with your copyright rights. As Agenda said, of course, there are laws that govern your rights as a copyright creator. One of the things that we didn't clarify, of course, U.S. law is what I practice, and so I can talk about our Federal Copyright Act. However, the world is much larger than just the United States, and there are actually other countries that have their own copyright laws. And in addition to that, there are international treaties that govern intellectual property. And one of the reasons why the U.S. copyright law changed is actually because in the 90s we agreed to an international treaty that required the United States to recognize moral rights, which is now found in Section 106A of the U.S. Copyright Act. Moral rights, in addition to the exclusive rights that Agenda talked about earlier, moral rights have to do with an artist's right of attribution and to prevent mutilation of works. And those are not really economic rights, where I think, the Section 106 rights of the right to copy, the right to make derivative works, the right to publicly perform, that's mostly about economics. But as an artist, if I make a piece of art and I put it in a public place and someone comes along, maybe who's the building owner, let's say, and takes down my work or takes out half of it, or removes the plaque that says I'm the author, the artist of it, What prevents that is Section 106A under the U.S. Copyright Act, and there are moral rights provisions in most other countries that have copyright acts that protect their the works in their countries. What's interesting, and we didn't really focus on it earlier, but moral rights, I believe, under the new terms of service are actually waived in Linden Labs, which I think is curious. I'm not really sure why they did that. I mean, for their efficiency, perhaps that makes sense. And in the United States, we don't focus as much on moral rights because they're relatively recent under federal law. But there are kind of, I guess, two sides to that. I certainly, if I had a painting that was hanging up in a public space, I wouldn't want the owner of that space to be able to alter my painting, let's say, to maybe fit it in a smaller room, at least without my permission. And I think that I also wouldn't want my name to be associated necessarily with a painting that I didn't make, especially if it was a crappy painting, which is the other side of moral rights, is that you have a right to remove an attribution that someone else has given to a work that isn't yours, or that you would disclaim as not being yours because of the alterations to it. So I just want to explain what that was, and I think it's curious that that the Linden Labs Terms of Service directly address that. I'm not really sure that other terms of service do, at least from what agendas presented. There's not really much mention of that. It's mostly the exclusive rights under Section 106 that people are concerned about licensing. Now, even though you have exclusive rights, and so the technical definition of that is you have to create an original work that's fixed in a tangible medium that others can perceive. It's 1976 is when the current U.S. copyright law is written, and that's the definition of what a work is, which can be protected and have these exclusive rights. I guess one of the other things I wanted to point out is that U.S. law was written in 1976, is well before there was the internet, well before there was Second Life, well before there was Facebook, Google. A lot of the things that we take for granted today just didn't exist then. So we're working under an older system, really didn't acknowledge a lot of system stuff or intellectual internet technology stuff that exists today. And that is some of the square peg round hole problems that we face in the 21st century trying to make this stuff work in what really is, I think, a completely new world when you're dealing with virtual worlds like Linden Labs. I think it's sometimes difficult to find a fair way to apply your exclusive rights in a world like this. And I think part of the controversy here is created by that struggle to recognize your rights but still have a functioning Second Life viewer and world for them to be in. Original works means that you created it. It's a pretty low bar in U.S. copyright law, at least, for it to be original. A direct copy of someone else's work, of course, is usually not protectable as your own. But a lot of things, example I give to my students, a lot of people go to Washington, D.C., and they visit the monuments that are there in D.C., and lots of people take photographs of those monuments of various sorts. And you would say, well, there's probably 1 billion photographs of the Jefferson Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial, so how could anybody's particular photograph have any exclusive rights in it? And I guess that the reason why even my humble photograph of the Jefferson Memorial has some exclusive right to it is that it was my day that I took it. I set the scene. It was my decisions about when to take the photograph. It was my decision about the angle, how to, what was going to be in it, what was going to be out of it. All those are creative decisions that I have made, in order to make my photograph. So that still would have some copyright protection. It doesn't exclude anyone else from taking a photograph of the Jefferson Memorial. It probably would only limit them from, directly copying my particular photograph that I took that day. But, if they went out there on their own and took their own photograph, they have the right to do that. I can't prevent them from doing that with mine. It's the creativity that went into making that photograph is what creates these exclusive rights in it. And there doesn't have to be a lot in order to qualify under the U.S. Copyright Act. And I think that in and of itself creates some challenges when you come into a virtual world like this where there's lots of creativity and most of it is owned by the author. That is the person that originally created it. So it creates a lot of tension, I think, in order to accommodate those rights among many, many people that work here or live here in Second Life. Now, I think Agenda touched on this, that, in order to use this system, so Second Life is a computer program. You connect to it through a viewer, and everything within Second Life really is protected by someone's copyright, in the sense that someone had to come and create the textures for this room, someone had to assemble them together. There are virtual three-dimensional objects in this room. There are chairs that you can sit in. There are scripts that control how your avatar works. There are scripts that control your positions within a seat or in a room. There's a lot of intellectual property that's user-contributed in order for this world to exist. In addition, Linden Labs itself had to write a whole lot of code in order to have the world itself exist in the first place. And so there's a lot of copyright-protected stuff that you really don't see, but you take for granted that it exists. And of course, there are places you can go that Linden Labs itself actually has created. And of course, there, as the author, are most likely, the owner of the copyrights in that. So, unlike the real world, when you walk through the mall, let's say, or you walk down the street in your hometown where you live, there's not as much stuff that you interact with that is copyrighted. Buildings exist in the real world, streets exist, the sunset, all the things that you kind of perceive in the real world. There's a minority of that is an original creation by an individual, in whom would there be exclusive rights that would prevent you from copying it. But I think what's different about this virtual world and others that have been created is that everything around you potentially is an exclusive work of an author. And it changes how you interact in this world as someone that's trying to deal with those rights, or be your own creator of works here. That you have a different relationship with everyone else. I think a lot more complicated of a relationship. But I think the other side of it is, I think Facebook's a good analogy. That there's a lot of things we share on Facebook that I don't know that people would normally share anywhere else. We have sort of a lower expectation of privacy about the stuff that we share on Facebook, I think, than what we might have had 10, 20, or 30 years ago. When you walk through Second Life, you may come here with the expectations that you have in real life, as to just sort of the room or the people you interact with. And you don't have as much interaction with copyright law, as a consequence of your real life interactions. But it's different in Second Life. I think the copyright is right front and center, in terms of every interaction, in theory, that you have here, potentially involves some kind of an intellectual property issue. Now, if exclusive rights were absolute and you couldn't limit them in any way, then Second Life could not exist. And I think that that's an important point to make. That, and in fact, I think in real life that if your rights were absolute, and you had absolute control forever over them, that you would probably defeat some, of the value of those rights. And so, at least under U.S. law, there are certain limitations built in, the biggest one being fair use, which permits you without a license to potentially use the works of others if you meet the criteria of fair use. And there is a balancing test. For those of you that are academics in the room, fair use in part covers criticism and certain kinds of academic use of other people's works without a license. So that exists out there as a limitation on exclusive rights. And of course, your rights don't last forever. Even in U.S. law today, it's your lifetime of the author plus 70 years thereafter, which is a relatively long time, granted, but it's not forever. Eventually, your works end up in the public domain, and then there is no license required in order to use or exploit those works. So, what Agenda has said is most licenses, when you get onto an IT system like Linden Labs for Second Life, it's usually a two-way license. They have to give you a license to be able to use their copyrighted works in order to access the viewer. And then I think that on the other side, we have to, if we're going to contribute original content, there has to be some license that we give the Linden Lab in order to be able to, for them to display your work or other people to see it in the world. And, so that's sort of a minimum thing. And I think what Agenda very ably covered is examples of some of the other systems out there where there are reasonable two-way licenses where the creative people that use that system give certain rights, certain licenses to use their works in certain ways, and in exchange you're able to use Facebook or one of the other ones, intellectual property, in order for you to access the system and do stuff in it. I think that one of the problems with, or what's maybe very different, I think one of you's pointed out here in the conversation, Facebook, I mean, to some extent, Facebook may be used for a limited purpose with businesses. So, for example, I have a Facebook page, fan page that, you can interact with my law firm through Facebook. But frankly, I mean, I don't do business on Facebook. It's not like I see clients on Facebook or, I don't practice law on Facebook. It's strictly, I think, a very limited kind of marketing that I do there. Whereas in Second Life, I mean, you're operating a business here. You're selling stuff, virtual stuff, to other users for Linden dollars, which can be translated into real dollars. And you guys have to be able to make a profit in order to survive. You've got to be able to market your goods effectively. And, in a lot of ways, many of us pay to be here. If you're a landowner, if you buy your own sim, it's a few $100s a month that you're paying, or you have to pay a landlord that maybe is the actual owner of the sim or the region in order for you to have a market here. So I think it, in some ways, I mean, what Facebook's concerned about is less of a business concern, and so their licensing regimen is a little bit different. What I think is curious is, previously, I remember looking at the terms of service for Second Life several years ago and thought, this is a very creator-friendly term of service. And I'm with you kind of shocked at what I think is a pretty substantial change in the terms of service today. I think it's unfortunate. It's going to have a very negative impact on many of you that are trying to make a go at business here in Second Life. Now, some of the other just sort of basic things I wanted to talk about. First off, I think my experience in lecturing and teaching students that are artists is often there's a lot of misunderstanding about your rights. I want to make sure that I say this to everyone, that you really should know what your rights are. It's very important that you understand that concept in terms of what your copyright rights really are, particularly if you're in business, because the contracts that you sign, whether they're electronic or whether they're on a piece of paper, often you are going to be held to the language of those contracts as a business owner. And you are presumed by signing or by using a system that you understand what the consequences are to your rights, or what your rights are, what you might be giving away. Particularly artists, I say, that are not formally trained in the law, typically. I can say in Maryland, I only know of one other graduate from Maryland Institute that also happens to be an attorney, so it's pretty unusual that you would have an artist that's also a lawyer. But you're still expected in the business world to really know what your rights are and to act accordingly. And the other part of it is that, if you don't pay attention to the impact on your rights in a system, whether it be Facebook, Second Life, or another, you may very well be giving away the farm without acknowledging or realizing it. And you're going to have an uphill battle, in a court system or somewhere else with someone when you say, well, I didn't read the terms of service, I just kept on using the system, or I didn't really read that contract, I just signed it because I just thought it was a formality. So that's important, that you have that understanding of what you're getting yourself into. One of the problems with Second Life, I think, for business owners here is lawyers still cost real money in the real world. It's not like there's a version of law that's practiced here in Second Life that's 1/250th the cost of what it is in real life. Even though in Linden's, when you do business here in Linden's, 250 Lindens make $1 US. So you operate at a discount in this world, essentially. But it's rare that an attorney will work for $1 an hour in real life. It just doesn't typically happen. So it's an obstacle, I think, to getting legal advice for you folks. But on the other hand, the legal system isn't going to coddle you. If you do not know your rights and you're doing business here, and you give away the farm, you're not going to get a lot of help from a court system in the real world to solve that problem. I think that at this point, I would just simply agree with Agenda in terms of the specific problems that we see within the Linden Labs terms of service. I do think they are an important change. I think they are not as friendly as they used to be to creative folks that are working in here. I think that it is a fair assessment that we need to act, I think, to try and convince Linden Labs to change the terms of service, and that it's not unreasonable for us to make those requests to Linden Labs. I don't know if there will be enough people that will stop using Linden's system or go to an alternate system to really change their mind. I don't know. But at the same time, I think it's important that you stand up for yourselves. And I think that's maybe where I would leave my part of this talk is, artists often, I remember I went to a gallery opening, I ran into an old professor of mine from undergrad and had mentioned to her I was an attorney, and was talking to her about kind of life as an artist. And she said, gallery owners often are the people that write, in the real world, are often the people that write the contracts for the sale of works of art. And good luck negotiating terms with them. It's sort of a take it or leave it. If you want the gallery to show your work, you have to deal with their contract. And it's rare, except for famous artists, that have a national, international following. It's difficult to have an equal bargain with large galleries, especially an artist just starting out, you often get what you get. But I say to everyone, it's a two-way street. There's only one Linden Lab, but there's many of us that are creative people. Both are needed in order for Second Life to be popular and successful. There has to be creativity in this world, and those rights have to be respected. Not just by other people in the world, but also by Linden itself. And I would certainly encourage people, and I do encourage artists, to stand up for yourselves. And you see something that doesn't make sense to you, or that substantially infringes on what you need in order to be a creative person here, then you have a right to be heard. I don't mean that will change anything, but you need to stand up for yourself. You are the only advocate for yourself in this interaction. So I think that's important to say. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know if, Jenda, if you have anything else you'd want to add at this point.
Yeah, that was loud. I think that it would be pretty good for us to discuss some of the potential problems with the specific terms of service. I think that we've kind of done a good overview, but there are some specific problems that people have pointed out. For instance, we were talking, I don't know if you have been sort of following the comments on my, well, I won't give a plug to my blog, but we've been talking about one of the issues is where they're calling for otherwise exploit in any manner or all or any portion of your user content and derivative works thereof. They're not limiting that to derivative works that are created on Linden Labs services or that are uploaded to Linden Labs services. And the concern that some people have is that if you make machinima or photographs or snapshots of Second Life content that are not even uploaded to Second Life, but are just derivative works of content that you have created in Second Life, is Linden Lab trying to claim ownership or license of those works? And I would argue that no, they're not, but they certainly have constructed their license such that they could argue that they are.
I just want to break in for a sec and let you know that Juris is here. She's not able to get to a chair, but she's here. So Juris, you can join the conversation, please. Hopefully her voice is working.
Well, once Juris is able to dive in, that would be great. Tim, do you have any thoughts on the on whether or not the lack of limitation to derivative works is an issue?
Well, one of the basic concepts in law is that you're held to the words as they are written in a contract. So once you acknowledge that the terms of service govern your relationship with Linden Lab, the words themselves really do matter in terms of what you give and what you don't give. Now, I know that it's common for people, that if you didn't write the contract, and in this case, it's obviously only one person can write the contract, which is Linden Lab. So you could construe the contract against Linden Lab, which would
Right,
protect you
contracts
more.
are always construed against the drafter. But
Well, not always.
actually,
Not always, but I think that, contracts like this, which can only, you have to agree or you can't use the system. I think there is a certain amount that you could construe against Linden Lab. But I would hesitate to answer that I have a clear or simple answer to derivative works question. I mean, I read, and I haven't read enough of I haven't reread the terms of service enough to be definitive, but my sense of this was that they're really trying to have a much broader right and licensing in all works. So they don't have to come back and ask you again if they have a different use for a work that's been published in this world in Second Life, and they don't necessarily know all the ways they want to use your works, which, I'll be honest with you, in the real world, that's very unusual. Anytime that I've gone to use photographs of someone in order to, for a business purpose, for marketing or for something, and I go to a stock photography place and I buy a license, the license is real clear on the limitations of how I can use it, the duration of the use, the cost. It's real specific. This is really the opposite, which is we're as broad as we really think we can be. And so that kind of opens the door to them doing stuff with works that I'm not sure you typically would agree to let them do, or at least not without compensation. It's a curious thing, I think. But let me, I'll stop talking. Let me look again at the section you're talking about, agenda. And
you can look at my slide. It's right above you.
Let me flip over here.
I'm really handy that way. Yeah, one of the things that I would like to point out, and this is kind of a big gotcha, is that normally, especially in California, you have unconscionability to protect you as consumers. Terms of service. Okay, let me back up a little bit. Unconscionability is something in contract law that protects consumers from manifestly unfair contracts. And unconscionability has two elements. It's procedural unconscionability and substantive unconscionability. And I'm kind of throwing out legalese like crazy, but I promise I'll explain. So procedural unconscionability is when something is sort of unfair, it's unfair in the way that it's written, and substantive unconscionability is, procedural unconscionability is unfair in the way that it is constructed, and substantive unconscionability is unfair in the way, in the substance of it, in the meat of it. So a terms of service agreement that you just have to click on and either say yes or no to it's called a contract of adhesion, and contracts of adhesion are just all by themselves procedurally unconscionable. That's just the way they are. So you've already satisfied that. They are all by themselves unfair. So then you have to look at how they're written and what the actual terms are. And if the actual terms of a terms of service are manifestly unfair to one side, then they are also substantively unconscionable, and the whole thing can get thrown out. Well, California is very friendly to consumers and very quick to call something substantively unconscionable and to throw out an entire terms of service for being unfair. So normally you would be protected from an agreement, especially a terms of service agreement, that is just flat out unfair. The problem is, in the last 4 years, the Supreme Court has been really, really friendly to arbitration agreements. And California used to protect consumers from arbitration agreements, especially arbitration agreements that denied you the ability to form a class action. The Supreme Court in 2009 threw out the ability, threw out California's law that protected consumers from terms of service agreements that barred class action agreements. So now everybody is putting class action waivers and arbitration agreements in their terms of service. And Linden Lab has done that. So now there is the arbitration agreement in the terms of service and the class action waiver, which means that you don't have the ability to go to court over something like this. You don't have the ability to form a class action over something like this. So even if this is manifestly unfair, you don't have the ability to take it to a California court, which is very friendly to finding that things are unfair. So that was a very long digression to say that a lawsuit is probably unlikely.
Okay, we need to try something really quick. I'm going to ask that everyone please refrain from talking in local chat for a little while, because right now that's the only way that jurists can communicate with us, and we definitely want to hear from her as well. Let her know that she can communicate in chat. She's working on that, and give her just a sec. Bear with us just a moment.
I feel like I should be humming something to keep you guys entertained. Forgive me, my training in classical singing is not so good, so I'll just be quiet.
Here she goes. Okay, I think what we're going to have to do is go ahead and move on to the formal Q&A. Juris, unfortunately, cannot communicate. She's not able to do voice. She's not able to do chat. So, Max, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to begin moderating the Q&A. So if you could take the floor, please, that'd be great. You guys can begin.
Thank you.
Great.
I just ask, please don't just type out your question in an open chat. If you have them, send them to me in an IM. I will take them and add them to the queue as I receive them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. IM them to Maxwell Graph, please. I'm up here in the front row if you want to click on me. Click on me.
Very
Max,
pretty.
you'll need to read those questions out loud so that it gets picked up for
Okay, I will
broadcast.
read them out loud, and I will also paste them into public chat so that people can
rock.
see as I go through. Okay, the first one is from Mona Eberhardt. Question regarding the perpetual and irrevocable parts. If the license to Linden Lab stops being perpetual and irrevocable, wouldn't that break people's inventories and even content, thus causing all sorts of drama? To be more specific, people use all sorts of stock content in their builds for SL. 3D models, textures, scripts, and so on. If the license was not perpetual and irrevocable, wouldn't builds using this stock content break? Or if someone decided they wanted their content deleted, wouldn't people's inventories and outfits get broken?
Not necessarily. Again, as I showed you how Facebook handles it, with you can revoke your license unless it has been shared. So with Facebook, when you share photos, when you share a post, you can't revoke your license to that anymore. You could very easily have something that says that you could revoke your license in Second Life unless the content has been transferred.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that Linden Lab necessarily needs a perpetual license to everything that you ever post here in order for the world to continue to function. And it's good for Linden Lab in the sense that they can transfer potentially that perpetual license to others. But I'm not sure that that's necessary for the world itself to work.
Now, I will make one point, and it's a very crucial point that I think I should have made a long time ago. I'm fairly sure that the reason for the change in terms of service is that Linden Lab has been recently making new services. They made the, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's a kind of Minecraft-esque new game. They just bought Desura. They're compiling new services, and I think they're basically doing what Google did last year, where they're trying to bring all of their services under one terms of service umbrella. Well, when Google did that, and Google has some really, really good lawyers, Google got slammed by the FTC. They failed to seamlessly bring all of their terms of service together. It was a nightmare for them. So I don't really know what Linden Lab was doing, thinking that they could easily bring all of their terms of service together without any problems. It's very difficult to bring lots and lots and lots of different services under one terms of service. But I'm pretty sure that's what they were trying to do, and they're trying to write in their terms of service all of the little eventualities for every little service that they're going to have, and in doing so they've created something that is ludicrously overly broad and fairly dangerous.
Yeah, I guess, Agenda, maybe that's the answer to how you do it, is you just take as many rights as you can. Well, I don't know that it helps anybody that actually uses this world, but I guess it might help them. I'm not really sure that's why we're here, necessarily, but maybe that's the only answer. And I guess when you raise the Federal Trade Commission with Google, it does kind of make you wonder. You know, I don't think that any one of us alone would have enough resources to really pursue a lawsuit against Linden Lab for their terms of service. And if you don't have a class action where lots of people could pay, either, you know, the third wheel of it is the federal government itself, in one way or another, may have an entity that regulates, like the FTC, and maybe that's an alternative place to advocate, to see if they would be interested in doing something about Linden Lab, so that it's not as hostile or overly broad. You know, usually FTC actions that I've heard about are about rights of privacy as opposed to intellectual property rights, but you know, they may have jurisdiction for at least consumers as well over some of the things that are going on in here. Again, I don't know if that would help us or not, but it's another option.
Okay, we're getting bunches of good questions here. I hope both of you have a good stout mixed drink at hand, and let me get on to the next one.
Yikes.
Jamie Palisades asks, has anyone talked directly to the lab about its desire to expand licensure to other virtual worlds explicitly? Can we reasonably try to limit the scope of their rights expansion interests on that topic?
I don't know if Tim wants to answer this first, or I can.
I mean, I say I haven't personally talked to Linden Lab. I don't know if others have.
I can't speak to whether or not anyone has. I know that there are several groups that have been talking to Linden Lab, or have been working on petitions to Linden Lab. This has been an issue of tremendous concern to the creator community. I know that whether or not the Linden Lab is looking into other virtual worlds as a competing or advancement of Second Life is certainly a concern. So I can't speak to what individual groups have been talking to Linden Lab about, but I know that there are groups that have been talking to Linden Lab.
Yeah, I wish Juris was able to participate, because I think she might have some insight. But unfortunately, I have nothing to add.
Juris can now hear on the live feed, and what she's going to do is type her questions as quickly as her answers as quickly as possible. So you guys talk slower when you have your time, and what I'll do is read those and put those in local chat. So she is going to be able to participate kind of through me.
That's awesome. I will talk very slowly.
Okay, next question. If we remove SL and us from the equation, looking at this from a purely corporate standpoint, does this not seem like a preparatory move, kind of standard corporate procedure prior to some kind of large-scale shift, like an exit strategy or a sell-off? or, as we said before, a transfer of content like from Marketplace to Desora?
Yes.
Additionally, are these current terms not technically illegal from a federal and international perspective? If for no other reason that the agreement was done, it seems like under a certain amount of duress, like you can't log in unless you sign this. You know, if
No.
you've got a legitimate business holding in here.
That's a question that has been addressed by several courts, and there never has been a really good test case for it. Every time something like that has come up, it's always been a user will accept the terms of service and then go back into the service, and so the court will throw it out. So we've never had a case where someone will not accept the terms of service and then try to get then sue to try to get their content. So we don't have a good test case for that. But as far as duress, it's not really duress. It's really a matter of whether or not you have a right to your intellectual property, to access to your intellectual property. The only
Go ahead.
Go on. Do you have something from Jura?
I do. She says, yes, it does appear to be a maneuver by Linden Research to secure their rights to the content submitted in World. The transfer of copyrights under TOS agreements has been recognized. I'm just going to put that in local.
Yeah, not only has the transfer of rights under TOS been recognized, there's actually a case in the Fourth Circuit that where the Fourth Circuit accepted a terms of service that required the transfer of ownership in copyright. A terms of service agreement for realtors required that anything that they posted on this site, they transferred ownership, not just license, but ownership of their content to the site. And the realtors sued, saying this was ridiculous and this did not affect a real transfer of ownership. And the court said, "Yep, sure does."
Okay. Again, I will say that I do not believe this is purely an intellectual property issue. This is, I've said, is more a visual artist issue. That is exactly the case I'm referring to. I assume she's talking about what you were talking about, Agenda. This is why in my legal defense of creators, I focus on their rights not as copyright owners, but as visual artists and their content, not as copyright protected subject matter, but as digital art.
That's a really good approach.
Well, and the problem is that, moral rights is one of the other things that's real specific in copyright law to visual artists. And the terms of service specifically here have you waiving them, which I find, again, curious. I'm not really sure why that would be required for the normal operation of the world. However, I would not be able to speculate as to what else is really going on at Linden Lab. I mean, they're a big company. It is quite possible that they want to sell their assets and move on and cash out, and maybe that's what's really underlying all this. It wouldn't be the first business to do that. However, I really don't know, and of course they're not going to tell you that clearly.
Okay, are we on to the next? Beth Ghostraven asks, the current slide that was up there in the PowerPoint, Second Life term says, do not be freaked out, that's not what's wrong with this section. Could you clarify what is wrong with this section of the TOS?
Sure. And I touched on this when I was speaking earlier, but I really kind of breezed through it because I wasn't sure how fast I needed to go. Sorry about that. So when it says sell and resell, those are not exclusive rights to copyright. Those are exclusive rights to patent. And I have no idea why whoever drafted this terms of use put those in there. It makes no sense. It really sounds like they just sort of grabbed some verbs that sounded really interesting and stuck them in there. It's the same thing with use and disclose. Use and disclose are trade secret rights. They have nothing to do with copyright. The reason that I say don't pay any attention to those is if you're not putting any patentable content in Second Life, which I don't really think very many people are, they don't have anything to do with your content. Yes, but Linden Lab is not claiming the right to make, practice, import. They're not claiming any other very important patent rights. They're just claiming one patent right. And it's not, if they're not claiming the right to make or practice, it's not very useful. It's the reason that that I say don't be as freaked out about that is because when it comes to copyright rights, you can sell and resell copyrightable or copyrighted material without claiming the right to sell or resell. Sell or resell has nothing to do with copyright rights. So putting that in there when it comes to copyrighted content doesn't really affect it. What's wrong with this section is the lack of limitation, is the things like unrestricted, unconditional, unlimited, irrevocable, perpetual, for any purpose whatsoever, in all formats, on or through any media, software, formula, or medium now known or hereafter developed, with any technology or devices now known or hereafter developed, blah, 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 blah. That's what's dangerous. That's what's damaging. That's the problem. And whether it is copyright or patent or trade secret, having that unlimited, vast, broad language in there is dangerous. It doesn't really matter. Go on. Sorry.
No, just a word from Juris. A little bit of disagreement there. Sale and resale does implicate the exclusive rights of copyright owners.
Okay.
And she's typing some more, so go ahead.
I'm just saying that you can sell and resell copyrighted content without claiming the right to sell or resell. That's what the distribution right gives you.
Okay, but my concern is the ability of Linden under these new terms to export content and rename themselves as owners without attributing the original author. That eliminates the ability of the author to control the modification and display of their work. She's taking a breath.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm saying that the danger here is the lack of limitation. You know, the lack of limitation in the purpose, the lack of limitation in the term, and the lack of limitation in the scope. You need a limitation in purpose, you need a limitation in scope, and that, what Juris is saying is a great example of some of the dangers of a license this broad.
I thought I would just contribute this. So the copyright rights that everyone has as an author are intangible rights. When you buy, like if I was to buy a painting from someone else, I own the thing. And under Section 109 of the first sale doctrine, I have the right to resell that thing, typically. And I can set the price that I sell it for. But I don't have a right to the copyright. So, for example, I couldn't publicly display someone else's painting without permission. That's not implied in my purchase of the painting itself. There has to be some other agreement that addresses that. And so I guess within this world, one of the things that Linden probably has to be able to do is to sell your stuff through XL Street. I mean, I guess there's some implication that that you post stuff up there on XL Street to be sold, or whatever the marketplace is called today. They're the mechanism by which transfers occur. And if you don't have a no transfer permission, if it's freely transferable, the thing that you've offered, then other people could, in theory, then sell it or resell it to someone else. But that still isn't really the copyright right. That's a separate set of intangible rights. And I wonder whether their license is intended to reach that as well, and I don't know how that would work. I guess I really don't have a clear answer, but I guess I would be cautious about whether they're overreaching, how that might impact authors here in the world.
That's a good point, Tim, but another thing to consider is that we're in the Ninth Circuit, and this is all digital. Even if it's art, it's digital art, it's digital content, and under Verner, the right of first sale. Is when it comes to digital goods. So if something has restrictions on transfer and restrictions on modification, then it's technically licensed. It's not, first sale isn't implicated.
All right,
yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, Verner v. Autodesk was specifically because Autodesk had a license that restricted resale. But the default position under copyright law is Section 109, which is first sale doctrine. I don't think that's been undone, merely because it's a digital good. You could have a license that restricts the first sale. That's probably enforceable for sure. But and I think a lot of you do. I mean, you have no transfer objects that you offer for sale. They can't be transferred. The world itself doesn't permit it. I wonder, though, whether this licensing, the way that the terms of service are set up, means that Linden Lab isn't limited by that. Maybe that's what they're trying to get at. And I don't know what the purpose of that would be for them.
Okay, referring back to Agenda's comments, that's the TOS killer, but again, it would be for a court to decide whether the waiver or irrevocable agreement not to enforce moral rights was, number one, specific in regards to the content to which the rights were waived under a generic TOS, and number two, whether the TOS would be considered a signed written agreement under the VARA. Do either of you have a comment on that?
I guess I just wouldn't want to be the first artist to have to go spend $100,000 on a bunch of lawyers in order to figure that out. I mean, I think they're trying to overreach by getting rid of your moral rights, and I think it's notable that other systems like Facebook, I don't think there's a moral rights clause like this. Of course, that doesn't help you. If it doesn't help you if you're not a visual artist. VARA is specific to visual arts. It doesn't necessarily affect every other kind of copyright here. One of you mentioned in open chat, about novels or things, which again, I don't know that anyone publishes novels in Second Life per se, but VARA doesn't really impact you. That's specific to visual arts people.
Yeah, Juris, I'm pretty sure that it would be, or at least if we were in the Fourth Circuit, which we're totally not, it would be considered a signed written agreement under VARA. The Fourth Circuit gives us that precedent. But, and you know, as Tim said, you know, who wants to be the person to spend $100,000 to go to court to find all this out? And again, you've got the arbitration agreement, you've got that sending you to arbitration rather than to actual court that would be much more friendly to you. I think trying to figure this out and looking to court to justify or to validate your claims is dangerous. I think this is something that needs to go to find a peaceful solution rather than finding an antagonistic solution.
So Tim is saying that digital art is not visual art. I disagree, but it would be for a court or arbitrator to decide. So she's directing that to you, Tim.
I don't think that's what I said, no.
She's asking for clarification.
I think it's what I said, but I said that under Werner it would be digital art.
Okay, the point is that trying to assert copyright against the TOS is an auto loser.
Yeah.
Okay, are we on to the next? We've got a ton of questions here.
Yeah, let's move on.
Go for it.
Okay, Treasurer Bollinger asks, does the new TOS apply only to items uploaded after you agreed to it, or all your items from before also?
All your items.
Okay, we on to the next thing.
Do you want me to expand on that, or Tim, do you want to touch on that? I feel like I'm kind of hogging the microphone.
I was just going to say, you know, the way that they define content means any works of authorship, creative works, graphics, images, textures, photos, and so on. This terms of service doesn't say, but only stuff you uploaded after you signed it. I'm not sure I have a clear answer to Treasurer's question, but I think it's intended to cover everything in your inventory, whether you uploaded before or after, which is kind of crazy. But
well, it's the way that terms of service work. It has to cover everything because otherwise they would have to keep track of different iterations of their terms of service and tie each thing that you loaded to which terms of service was in effect at the time that you upload it, and which rules governed the thing that you uploaded at the time that you uploaded it, and it would just be impossible for a company to stay alive if that's how it worked. So what they do is they they put the new terms of service in force, and they require you to affirmatively agree to the new terms. And it kind of sucks, but that's the way that they do things.
Okay, on to the next here. Daniel Iridium asks, what if the sell-resell thingy was put there intentionally, betraying Linden Labs' actual plans to sell SL as it is? As far as I know, they need rights over the content in our inventories in order to sell SL together with our user accounts. Otherwise, we'll wake up one day owned by some other company and with our inventories blank. Am I right in that?
I think that's probably a little far-fetched. Again, sell and resell refers to patent content. It doesn't refer to copyright content. Sell and resell, it's like modify and adapt refers to copyrighted content. Sell, resell refers to patented content. So it's whether they put it in there just because they were grabbing at verbs that said we can sell your stuff is a different issue. And if that's what they did, it just means that they didn't really know what they were doing when they were drafting. People keep talking about renderosity. That's just such a totally different issue. Renderosity is such a totally different issue. If you have a question about renderosity, please ask Max and get in the queue, and I would love to talk about it. But the sell and resell thing is they're talking about they're either talking about a section of intellectual property rights that would be rare for content on Second Life, or they're just putting in verbs that don't mean what they think they mean.
I mean, I guess the other side of it, let's just say that Linden Lab wanted to sell to some third party. They own their own intellectual property, which is how Second Life exists. And so there's nothing that we could do to prevent them from selling to another business or forming a new business entity and transferring their intellectual property rights. You know, where would that leave your rights? I guess it would be whatever license it is that's transferable by Linden Labs to any third party without your consent. You know, so does that mean they own, you know, does a successor company own your stuff? Well, no. I mean, you could probably close your account. But whatever license it is that Linden has that they can assign to anyone else, that other third party would then have the same license, in theory, to your stuff. And I don't know that they had to change the terms of service to accomplish that. I'm pretty sure the old terms of service permitted Linden Lab to assign itself, you know, to other people, and I don't think we had any limitations that we could enforce on their intellectual property. But I don't know. I don't clearly have all the answers to that part.
Hold on. That's absolutely true. And you think about, you know, Instagram recently got bought by Facebook, and it didn't cause the world to end, and it didn't cause anybody's content in Instagram to suddenly disappear, and Instagram did not have to, before the sale, change their terms of service to allow the sale to go through. Companies always have in their terms of service the ability to transfer their content, the content that is stored on the service, because that is the value of the company. So that's not an issue.
Okay. The terms of the license granted under the TOS is really suspicious in that it stated that no bargain for exchange or value is given to the creator in exchange for the grant of the right. I don't know if such a lack of bargain for exchange would be upheld under contract laws. Perhaps that would depend on state laws more so than federal. Particularly considering the reliance of creators on the previous terms of service. Go ahead.
I totally see what she's saying, but that is, courts have upheld as long as you affirmatively regain consent, and that's why you have to click on the accept again, and tell her to check. I think Blockbuster v. Harris. I think that's that. No, that's not the right case, but.
Well, one thing I will say, unlike other systems, like I think Facebook's a good analogy. The old Facebook terms of service were probably more limited, and then they've kind of broaden what their rights are under the licensing in their terms of service. And you might say, well, I detrimentally relied on Facebook's old terms when I was uploading all of my controversial pictures of my friends on Facebook. But that's, I think, categorically different than a business that might detrimentally rely on Linden Lab providing a certain kind of availability. I think one of you mentioned, it's really hard for you to take stuff you've made in world and transfer it to another world. I don't know that there's a universal world where goods in Second Life could be transferred to. They really only are good here. So there are some elements of, we're here because we could operate a business in Second Life that could generate transferable and real-world wealth, and you have substantially limited that ability to do that to our injury. Will you win on that argument? Would you win in court on that? I mean, detrimental reliance in light of the fact that there's an existing contract that you've agreed to is a hard case, but it's not that that's impossible. Again, you just sort of have to rely on a court to agree with you, and it might vary, depending on what court you go to. I don't know under California law because I don't practice there, but in Maryland, there's a lot of different rules. That's a hard way to go about it, but not an invalid way. I mean, I do think there's a point there that this is a different place, Second Life, in terms of what we're doing here, and we relied on old terms of service to do it. So when you change that kind of out of the blue, I think that's fundamentally different than other systems.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
This kind of leads into the next question, which I'll post here. One thing I'd like to say first is we unfortunately have way more questions at this point than we're probably going to be able to get to, so I'm going to ask that you address any further questions to either the panel members at a later time or to the UCC-SL forums or members in the future, please. Because I don't think we're going to be able to get to all the ones that I've got. We've got a ton. The next one being, Anonymous asks, how likely is this TOS to hold up under actual litigation based on precedents, etc.?
Tim, do you want this, or should I?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I really don't know. I think it would depend. I mean, I guess I would have to defer to people that have litigated these sorts of things previously. I have not, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a litigator, but I can tell you that your big problem is always going to be the arbitration clause. So actual litigation is going to go to arbitration, and there's your problem. It's as for how it's likely to hold up. Personally, I think it wouldn't, but I think arbitration is always a crapshoot. So I think you're better off. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. It doesn't cost much to file claims before the courts, pro se. VIPO has assisted right holders by reviewing their complaints to ensure that those filings complied with legal requirements, etc., of course, within ethical rules governing the profession of attorneys. I do not believe it would hold up. It would hold if the correct cause of action was pleaded. Excuse my reading. I'll put that in chat.
I agree with Juris. I don't think it would hold up. I definitely don't think it would hold up in court. I think your problem is getting to court. As for whether it would hold up in arbitration, it's a crapshoot.
The arbitration clause was challenged in Bragg versus Linden, and it didn't hold.
Yes, that was Bragg versus Linden, but that was before the Supreme Court threw out California's arbitration law against unfair arbitration clauses, and that was before the Supreme Court completely redid our entire thinking on arbitration. The Supreme Court has every year since 2009 upheld the FAA, and ever since 2009, companies have been strengthening their arbitration clauses in their terms of service, and every year the Supreme Court has been upholding them, and every year state courts have been upholding them. So arbitration clauses and courts in arbitration have just been getting stronger.
Okay, let's get on to the next one. Thank you. Samantha Orberg asks, with content creator having no choice but to accept the new TOS in order to log in, are there still grounds for legal action if our content is used without the creator's permission?
Yeah, I mean, you can still, you can bring any case you want. There's no limitation in that sense. I think the question would be whether you are less likely to win, because of affirmative consent to the terms of service. And I think, frankly, it's kind of a crapshoot. Agenda was talking earlier about unconscionability and contracts of adherence. And, of course, that's a state law, state-by-state thing. California is different than Maryland. I think we're actually less likely to side with consumers on that particular issue than California is. So it's kind of the same with this. I mean, you could probably argue, and I think Bragg v. Linden in part argued successfully that there was a contract of adherence, in that circuit. They also at that time beat the arbitration requirement. But I don't know. I guess I'd defer.
Exactly. I believe a strong case could be made on that basis.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I totally agree that there's absolutely grounds if your content was used without your permission, and I think there's absolutely grounds for unconscionability. And yes, Bragg v. Linden did use unconscionability and used it very well. And it kills me that Bragg v. Linden went to settlement, and we don't have a great precedent on the actual case at hand, because that was a beautiful case.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, if you sent Linden Lab a DCMA takedown notice because they had something they were using without your permission, I wonder what they would do. I mean, because the other side of it is they run the risk of a very large copyright judgment against them.
They run the risk of losing Section 230 safe harbor.
Yeah, because they're the ones doing it. They're not just facilitating it. So, yeah, that's an interesting question, whether that would be enough of a leverage to really hammer them. I don't know. I mean, maybe they would relent them. Interesting. I mean, I don't know all the details about DCMA, but I assume that you'd be able to file it through their website first to make the complaint if they actually are using your content for themselves in a way that you didn't authorize. See what happens, but interesting point.
I think it's actually a good sign that all of the challenges made by users against Linden have settled, including Minsky.
It's a good sign, but it's a sad sign because it means we don't have any great precedents.
Well, I think it reflects the muddle, which is that there's no clear right or wrong answer because there's so little known. What I said earlier, I think this is really a brand new world. It's like when photography was invented. Back then, we weren't sure in the 1830s if copyright even applied to it. I think a lot of people thought it didn't. And so this is kind of, unfortunately for everyone here, this is also kind of brand new world, so you don't really know. And Linden, having a lot of money, their corporate attorneys are more likely to want to settle to avoid a bad precedent. But And the other side of it, I guess the only way you'll ever know is if you pursue it and see what you get.
Starlight Dark Matter asks, how is it they can apply this retroactively to content already created and uploaded prior to the new TOS?
Didn't we already discuss that? That's the it's part of, you are presented with the contract. You get the chance to read the contract. You agree to the contract. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the short answer, Starlet, is that it's not illegal for them to propose a contract like that. I'm not sure it's against public policy either. It might be. It's contract of adherence. It might be against public policy, but it's not flat out illegal. So, if you read it, you can be held to it. I mean, you can fight them, but there's nothing that really would. I don't think there's anything that would stop them from saying all your content means all your content.
And again, forgive me if I'm posting stuff that we've already kind of gone over a little bit. You can gloss over that or just mention that it was covered previously if we do, just because I copy these down as I got them. So we'll move on.
I don't know, Toy Soldier. I mean, I looked at 1.1 just now in the terms of service when it defines content. I don't think it doesn't exclude stuff. I mean, it says means any works. It doesn't say any works that are after the date of this term of service. Your continued use. I mean, I think that's what they're trying to claim. I'm not saying that's favorable to you, but I think literally any work, I think that means any work.
Okay. The next person, Kaitna Brine, I guess is how you pronounce that. Big issue I see is twofold: buying and selling work in and out of Second Life. I realize Linden Lab actually reselling material is unlikely, but as with CG Textures and Renderosity, most textures, etc. providers do not allow reselling, and many or most media publishers insist on buying some form of limited exclusive rights to buy it at all, which is no longer possible under the changed TOS. One of the main strengths of SL is how well it facilitated internet-wide business-to-business sake. How can the TOS changes be amended to protect this ability to build internet-wide creative?
While you guys are reading that and pondering it, I want to go back just a bit. It's not true that simply because you agree to the TOS that you cannot sue. There's nothing that can stop you from suing, in particular to clarify ambiguous provisions under the terms. So that's regarding our last question. Go ahead and deal with this one.
Okay, so should I jump in on this one with the CG Tech
Absolutely.
and Renderosity? All right, fabulous. There is nothing that has changed in the terms of service that drastically affects CG Tech and Renderosity's terms to the point that they should have reacted the way that they did. If they don't allow reselling, then they should never have allowed uploading to Second Life in the first place. And that they have gone off the rails and said, okay, you can never allow use of our stuff in Second Life now, is, I think, an overreaction. I think it's them jumping on a bandwagon and taking the opportunity to get some press and bash Second Life. I think it's silly, and I'm irritated and disappointed in both of them. for rabble-rousing and poking at what is already a very sensitive hornet's nest. It's embarrassing. You have always been able to sell stuff in Second Life. They should have never allowed upload to Second Life if they had a problem with reselling textures. Businesses can always be sold. If they had a problem with the idea that you could upload stuff to a business that might someday be sold, it's just silly. There, I'm done.
Yeah, I guess this limited exclusive right, I don't know that you ever didn't give Linden Labs some kind of a non-exclusive right to things that you uploaded here. Jenna or Juris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that was the only way this could work is if you uploaded stuff here, that Linden had to have some kind of a license to it, and that it was a non-exclusive license to begin with. I don't know that that's really changed by the current terms of service, because I presume that you had to give them some kind of a license before that was non-exclusive. So if you had something that you wanted to license exclusively, I'm not sure this was the place to do it. Again, I could be wrong, but I'm not sure that's really anything new.
That's absolutely correct, Grandma. You have to give Linden Lab a license to make a copy, because they have to have a copy of it on their servers. You have to give them a license to modify it, because they have to put it in a different format to store it. You have to give them a license to publicly display, to publicly perform. You have to give them a license to distribute. You have to give them these licenses, or otherwise they cannot function. And you give the same licenses to, and that's why I showed you all of the other terms of services out there. You have to give people these licenses, otherwise the internet does not function. If you're looking to use to give your creative content somewhere that you're going to have to create an exclusive license, don't create it on Second Life. Don't create it on Facebook. Don't create it on Flickr. Don't create it on the internet, where you're going to have to establish these kind of license agreements.
Okay, my position is that's their right as creators of digital art, as it's their right to control modifications or display of any kind of their work. Well, the right to control the publication of their works outside of the environment is very much an exclusive right of creators, and it's not a right, whoops, it moved, granted under the terms. It is a question whether their distribution is in fact distribution if it is shared in world only. It is, in my opinion, a right to display. I'm going to copy that over.
Well, yes, but it has to be a right of distribution to distribute it over the internet. And that's been established. It's distribution over the internet is distribution. Well, there's different cases about it. Some courts have called it distribution if you just make it available, and some courts have called it distribution if you actually, if there is actually transmission involved. So different courts have ruled differently. But there does have to be, you do have to have the right of distribution in order to make something, to transmit something across the internet. But yes, no, I completely agree with Juris. It is the right of creators to control modification or display of their work. You do have to give an internet, an online service provider some of these rights. But this comes back to what we're saying all along: is that your license, the permission that you give, should be limited. and you should be able to control what permission you give. And the problem here is that in this terms of service, Linden Lab is asking for such an unlimited and such a broad right.
Okay, thank you. We have another one from Chantal Hart. She asks, I am a filmmaker and I use SL to make animations, machinima, for children's books and TV. The old TOS, all we needed to do was have the rights in writing from all the creators of the objects, including avatars in the film, would be my property to sell and use as I saw it. Can you tell me, how does the new TOS affect me now? Do I still have the same rights, or are my rights compromised by Linden Lab claiming rights on my copyright property?
Actually, Juris may be able to answer that even better than I could.
She has a quick response to your last statement. It's also a question, C. Moberg agenda, whether uploading content without the ability to download that content in World is publication.
True.
And
Yes.
Okay.
No, she's right. Yes.
I sent her this other question, so it's a long question, so she's reviewing it. But go ahead and answer that, if you can.
I think Juris is going to have a better answer than I will, but I don't think that the machinima license has changed. I haven't. I looked at the machinima license yesterday, and its text is still the same, so they haven't actually changed it, but I don't know if it's the new TOS affects it, so the real question, I think, is one that I raised with Tim earlier. I would argue that that Linden Lab has absolutely no claim over anything that you make here, but that's what I would argue. And the real question is, are they going to argue back? And I think I really want to hear what Juris has to say.
Okay, she's working on it. Tim, do you have any comments while we wait?
Yeah, I don't have any clients that make films in Second Life, so I have not studied the issue. I'm not sure how this really would have an impact offhand, but it's quite possible that it would. I just don't know.
Okay. There is
Until I would
definitely
say that you completely own the rights. That's what I would say. But yeah.
There is definitely reason to be concerned. There are new claims to your content under the revised terms. She's still working. I don't believe they are valid assertions to your content, but I can't ignore that there are rights being claimed on their side.
I totally agree. This is what Tim and I were talking about with the exploit in any manner or any portion, all or any portion of your user content and derivative works thereof. This is what we were just talking about earlier today. I don't believe they are valid. I agree with Juris.
Even the definition of content is not the same. Under these new terms, or that I think might be the end of the sentence. Even the definition of content is not the same under these new terms. Okay. I think we can move on.
Okay. Janoria Corvin asks, what if we are located in a completely different country, such as Australia? What are the constraints and limitations and the effects of agreeing to a U.S. and California state law if we are in said places outside of the U.S. and California?
Well, so under the terms of service, any terms of service, any online terms of service will have a jurisdiction section, and usually you'll just scroll down to the end to see what it is, and it'll tell you which law governs the contract. And so for Second Life, it is U.S. and California law that governs the contract. And so even if you are in Australia or Croatia or the UK and you have a dispute, regardless of what court you go to, if you go to an Australian court, they're going to use U.S. law to decide the case. They're going to use California law to decide the case.
Okay, thank you.
I think you can go on.
Okay, getting a question. Give me just a second. Sorry.
While we're waiting, Jurist says, that's the idea, but other courts may have jurisdiction depending on the nature of the claim asserted.
Yeah, I mean, what law governs and what court has jurisdiction, it's not black and white. I think it's more likely than not it would be U.S. and California law, but but there's copyright laws in other countries that protect their citizens differently than the U.S. copyright law protects ours. I mean, that's existed for a very long time as a problem. And even if there are international treaties that are supposed to govern all of it the same, I can assure you that France's copyright laws are somewhat different than U.S. And are, other places look at this differently. I don't know how that would come out. I don't know of a case offhand that I could say would predict the outcome for that, but it is something you argue, I would think, along with everything else, particularly if you're in a place that's more favorable. But you do I think you take your chances in some ways because you're using a system that's based in the United States and it's based in California, that it's more likely that it would be governed by our law and California law for the contract part. But
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're absolutely right. That's, you argue whatever you've got.
For example, those asserting copyright infringement may be able to bring those claims outside of California if their rights are affected and have decisions regarding that content enforced in the U.S. Agenda, what about the Canadian Skins copyright infringement case?
I can't answer any questions about that.
Okay, are we ready for the next?
Yes, move on.
Okay. This is a 2-for-1 because they are related. Thea D asks, what are realistic, effective ways to make a case to Linden Lab? And Toy Soldier Thor adds, if I, as a creator, wanted to reject the recent TOS, how could I remove the lab's rights to the TOS I refuse to agree to?
Those are two different questions. If you wanted to reject the recent TOS, you shouldn't have agreed to it. Your options now are to mitigate the damage. The realistic, effective ways to make a case to Linden Lab are to work together with some of the groups that are trying to make a case to Linden Lab, and there are several. I think UCCSL is probably a really good group to work with. I know that they are trying to gather as many people as they can to present a united front, and I know there are a few others. That's where I would suggest going right now.
All right, so in answer to Theodie and Thor's question, Juris can help you. Let me read that. It says, send Juris an email and we'll write them a notice. So that's how you begin that process. And I'm going to put all that in local so you'll have her email address.
Yeah, I guess the other part, I think you have a point, which is that you got to log in. Let's just say, you had 10,000 items in your inventory, and then they changed the terms of service. You can't log back in until you accept the terms of service. So I guess if you did that and then you logged in and you deleted all of your stuff, that maybe you have a different argument than if you use it for a while afterwards and then suddenly have a realization that, oh, wait, I shouldn't have accepted that because I think they're bad terms for me. I guess the other part, even today, I don't know what Section 2.6 said previously, which is when you delete, you terminate your license with Linden Lab with certain limitations. I don't know if the limitations were different offhand on the old terms of service. I guess a mitigation would be you would remove all your stuff that you've got in your inventory and close your account. I don't know if that solves it. I guess it would limit what they could do at that point with your stuff to whatever they claim under Section 2.6. But I don't know. Agenda, was there an older version of 2.6 that's different than this? So it seems logical that anything you'd sold or transferred to anybody else, that your license to them can't be terminated at will.
Yeah, it wasn't 2.6. It was Section 7 before that, and it changed very drastically with this new terms of service. It was a very significant change. And yeah, as Sweet Valentine just gave you let me look. An older link. And I can tell you that there are plenty of cases where there was a case for Instagram just this year where there was a class action of people that didn't want to agree to Instagram's new terms of service and sued, but all of them, or at least all of the representative members of the class, had logged on and accepted the new terms of service and continued to use Instagram, and so the judge threw the case out, and they lost because they had continued to use the service. So actually accepting the terms of service and continuing to use it weakened their position to the point that they couldn't assert their rights.
How long did they use it? Do you know?
At least a month.
Yeah, so it's a relatively short period in that case. I think that the old terms of service that Sweet shared in terms of the old way that this worked, some of it's the same, which is that you can delete stuff and that it does terminate in general the license that Linden has, but that things that there are things that survived even under the old rule. So I guess the basic concepts maybe not the same or not that much different. But yeah, I don't know. I guess if you really got upset about it, that it seems that you have to get in and delete your stuff. And I'm not sure that's great based
Actually,
on
I have
what
a
they
comment on
suggested.
that.
Yep.
The deletion of your content from your inventory did not cover other copies on the server.
Well, and Linden, even under the old terms of service that was shared, had a right to keep copies and backups and things that they needed internally for system administrative purposes. But the fundamental, I deleted it ends my license to Linden. That statement's still, I think, the same. There might be some nuanced changes that it's less of a termination now than it would have been then.
Okay. I would hesitate to make analogies between Instagram and Second Life, particularly as regards the reliance of creators on the stated intention of SL to respect user rights and to allow them to retain intellectual property rights to that content. Trademarks, finally, she yells.
No, I think it's it's a good point that that Second Life is a completely different animal from Instagram. I'm just, there aren't a whole lot of legal precedents for this kind of thing, and so I'm grasping at what I've got, and I'm not sure what she means by trademarks finally, but yeah, we haven't talked about trademarks a whole lot. That's true.
She's typing furiously.
It's always fun when she does that.
The right to control the use of logos, trademarks, etc. is arguably outside of the scope of the license granted under the TOS.
Yep. I wasn't going to mention it.
So theoretically, a cease and desist could be issued to them and the content demanded to be taken down.
Yep. I wasn't going to mention it.
Trademarked content, that is.
It's been used in commerce, hasn't it? I'm not trying to give Linden Labs any great ideas for the next TOS update.
Trademarks can be considered as anything identifying the source of origin of the goods or services offered in world.
Okay, are we on to the next now?
She is still typing. Let me see. Let me.
I
ask her if
imagine
she's
Juris
gonna-
has quite a bit to say, so give her just a second.
Sure.
We're kind of getting her panel input now that she didn't get to give before. They can't negotiate trademark licenses in one-ended fashion and expect them to be legal. A specific license governing the use is required. Now she is done. You can go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, the licensing section that we've been talking about has to do with content, which is defined in the terms as a work of authorship, creative work, graphic, image, texture, photo, logo, video, audio, text, and interactive feature. But interestingly, they don't say trademark. I mean, logo sometimes is a trademark and sometimes it's not. They acknowledge that trademark is separate from copyright. So I do think there's an argument to be made that you probably ought to have a separate licensing understanding about use of marks, because there's a whole different area of law that governs trademark. It's as complicated and intricate as copyright. And that has a big impact on business people that are here, because beyond the copyright issues with your works, you have your business name or how you market your work, which often implicates trademark rights. So that's an interesting point. I wonder, whether that's a separate way to challenge the ridiculously overly broad statements that have been made from Linden.
Yep, and the trademarks have been, most of the trademarks in Second Life are not federally registered, but that makes them no less valid. Linden Lab can say that they're claiming use of logos, but if they're not actually claiming the mark and they're not actually claiming all of the goodwill attached to the mark, they're not actually licensing the mark. I think they're I don't think they're actually attaching the trademarks, and I think that that protecting a brand's trademark is still a very valid way to protect stuff. I think it's a very good option.
A license for trademarks requires instructions regarding placement of the marks and requires a certain level of control that only a trademark owner can impose.
Yep, I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, you usually would say, you got to follow my guidelines for how to use my mark, and that there's certain colors, and you can't change the mark around because your trademark is very specific in terms of how it works. And I don't think that's present in these terms of service. I guess maybe someone from Linden is listening to this broadcast and is busily changing their terms of service now, but that's kind of a different matter.
Yeah, see, I didn't want to give any ideas.
But yeah, it's an interesting problem because if you haven't licensed it and they reuse it, there are rights that they have to as anybody would have to reuse people's marks in certain ways. There's certain limitations on your exclusive right to trademark, but it's not very broad. Where they're trying to have kind of a very broad right on your user content otherwise. So it's interesting.
Okay, the next question. Sebastian Viper asks, I own a breedable company. Does this TOS give the lab the rights to my business concept? And could they take a portion if I went out to sell my game to a third party?
Yeah. It does not give Linden Lab rights to your business concept, not the idea. But yeah, they could probably try to assert some rights if you tried to sell your game to a third party, depending on what it was that you were trying to sell. I don't think their claim would be valid. But this is the question is what they could try to do under this ridiculously broad terms of service, not what I think is correct.
Okay, thank you. Unless Tim or Juris has anything to add, I'll go to the next.
Juris does have something to add, so hold on just a sec. If their assertions under this TOS were determined valid, then the content associated with your business would be vulnerable, as you would not be able to agree to certain sales terms which may be presented to you. And she's still typing a bit here. Regarding the exclusive rights to your content, for example. Still waiting. Hold on just a sec. Oftentimes, business partners will require that your IP does not implicate or infringe third-party rights. And you may not be able to make such warranties regarding content that has been made available in SL. She's still typing. The same requirement is often made under license agreements, etc. Max, you can move on to the next question.
Okay. The next question is from Crap Mariner, who says, "Hi, darling," which I'm assuming is addressed to me because I'm special. How does TOS 2.3 affect a writer's ability to collaborate on and peer review works in SL without risking their ability to market their works exclusively or as a first refusal to publishers, or perform for that matter?
It's basically the same thing that we've just talked about. If you're going to do something that requires exclusive licensing, doing it in Second Life first, it does implicate that. I mean, but it always has. This doesn't change anything. You always have the difficulty of, it's the same thing as anything on the internet. When you're sharing it on the internet, you're giving license away. The big question is then, can you pull that license back and then give an exclusive license to someone? On Second Life right now, you can't pull that license back. It is perpetual and irrevocable. Yes, you would have a hard time signing an exclusive license contract with someone because you've already given part of that license away. Right now, yeah, you have a problem. Yeah. Well, you're not giving your license away. You're sharing it. It's very much like if you posted it on WordPress. So you post it on your blog on WordPress, and it becomes publicly shared. You still own it. It's still yours. But it is no longer something that you can then turn around and give an exclusive license to. Because an exclusive license means that only one person has the right to publish it. you've already published it, you've already exposed it, you've already shared it.
Okay, all exclusive rights to copyright protected content is implicated under the new terms. I would suggest that you get situation-specific legal advice.
I completely agree. If you have a specific situation that you need to talk to someone about, there's 3 of us sitting right here, and there's more of us in the audience.
Waiting for just a little bit here. While we're waiting for her to answer, I am getting IMs from people with note cards or just IMs for more questions. Please hold those till after. I can't focus on them. And also, please put them in note cards, and the first thing you should put on there is legal question. That would be very helpful. Okay, this is from Juris. Again, I would not assume that works made available, that's in quotes, in world have been published for the purposes of establishing copyright. There's more to this, I think. It would require a look into the details surrounding the creation and use of that particular piece of content. We can move on to both in world and outside. So yes, we can move on to the next question.
I agree with Juris on that.
Okay. I'm basically going to put the next 2 together because they're similar, although not directly related. The Wizard of Odd asks, could you address the issues of what happens if the lab goes bankrupt or sells M&A with a perpetual license? What happens to assets in the asset server on a pragmatic basis? And Nicole X Moonwall asks if this is a way for Linden Lab to put asset on their books to sell or to do an IPO, should not the co-owner of the right share the profits? Or if they go with an IPO, they get some stock, get founder stock?
For Nicole, I will just counter that with, are you getting any founder stock or stock in Twitter? Because Twitter's value is in its tweets, and I assume that you have made some tweets, and the tweets are their pretty much their sole asset, and I'm not getting any money from those. No, you're right. The Twitter does not give you the right to sell your tweets, but Twitter sells your tweets. I promise you, Twitter sells your tweets. Twitter asks you to license your tweets to it and tells you outright in the terms of service that you will not receive any money for this license. Just like Linden Lab tells you that you will not receive any money for this license, and Linden Lab, in all of its versions of its terms of service, has told you that you will not receive any money for this license. So, no. As far as what happens if the lab goes bankrupt, it will probably shut its servers, but that doesn't change. I mean, that's the way it always has.
Juris is working on a response. Okay. There is no reasonable expectation of ownership in tweets as opposed to content submitted in a world that stood out as the only provider of this kind that allowed users to retain IPRS. That'd be intellectual property rights. And she's done. We can move on.
No, I agree with that.
Oh, sorry.
With what Juris is saying, that that there's no reasonable expectation of ownership in the tweets. I'm talking about under the license agreement, and under the license agreement, you are not given any remuneration for the license, and you never have been. There's nothing that changed under this version of the license from prior versions of the license. If Linden Lab goes public, you're not going to get a piece of that pie.
Yeah, I guess, the first question from Wizard of Oz, if Linden Lab were to go under, that would be the end of this virtual world. I guess in theory they could sell their intellectual property, like BlackBerry's facing this today, that, they just can't compete in the market, but they have assets and patents and things that have some value. And someone could buy those assets and create a new virtual world that maybe isn't called Second Life, but it's called Third Life, or maybe they just create Second Life again. I don't know. But if no one wanted to buy whatever Linden's assets were, then it would just simply go away. I mean, there's plenty of businesses that fail and their assets are worthless and they disappear with them. It's kind of like the 21st century problem with cloud computing, that you deal with a cloud service provider, you store your stuff, but I think most SIT people would say you probably ought to back it up somewhere else just in case, because they might not be around forever. I guess to Nicole's point, we don't own Linden Lab, and we don't own any part of it by participating here, so they have no obligation to treat us as a shareholder or owner of Linden Lab. I think, there's lots of things you might argue about your relationship with them, but ownership of Linden is not one that I think is arguable in terms of their corporation. But, they're, I guess in reverse, yeah, I mean, they want to have assets that are available for sale. The licensing that they have in your works is an asset. Again, I don't know how much value it has. It is just a license. It's not, it's not that they own it. It's a different kind of property right that they have. But does that mean you get something back for it? I mean, artists have struggled with this for years. I mean, you put a painting on the market and you sold it for $1,000. 20 years later, it's worth $10 million. You get nothing from that $20 million, $10 million transaction. You got your $1,000 and that's what you got. Here, I think it's kind of worse because Linden doesn't pay anything for the license. If anything, you pay them to participate in this system. But that said, I guess that's all I would say.
Okay, so this thought from Juris is probably a little bit backtracked, so bear with us on where that applies exactly. Yes, there is now. It says they can, for commercial purposes, use your content. That's new. Cost-free right and license to use, copy, record, distribute, reproduce, disclose, sell, resell, sublicense, and otherwise exploit in any manner whatsoever. Commercializing your works should be compensated.
Okay, perhaps it should be, and we can certainly argue with Linden Lab about that, but it is not. It is not even okay. Sure. Yes, I agree. It should be. I'm totally with you. In theory, it should be.
Can we move on, Juris?
Let me know.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. The next question is from Jam Maley. My question would be, even if this is all done for reasons like providing their services easier and under the umbrella of one TOS and maybe even being able to operate coming services like SL Share, still, why would they claim these rights for everything and not just for the purposes of operating these services, even the rights to sell and resell?
Yeah, it's hard to know what Linden's up to. I guess it's easier to just, I said to Agenda before all this that, it might be easier just to drastically change your terms of service once rather than have to change them in little or smaller parts. I think that probably from our point of view, they ought to just take the license that they need. Obviously, they didn't think of it that way, which I think is unfortunate. But also if they've got stuff under wraps that they don't want the public to know about, then they wouldn't publish a limited license ahead of time that would give away things that they might be working on in secret. And often business transactions are under a veil of confidentiality or secrecy. So it may just be that wasn't a practical way to approach it, but. From my point of view, I'd rather they have a limited license that's more limited than this, if that was the business reason. But
Next question.
Okay, Marcus Ingpen asks, does the permission system built into Second Life for objects, I'm assuming, set precedents in any ways that might affect interpretation of the TOS?
well, I think you start with the basic concept of what your copyright exclusive rights are, and when you yourself are licensing your work to other users in Second Life through the transfer process, at least it speaks to how you typically do business. Does that limit Linden Labs when you accept their terms of service? That's a hard question. I really don't know. I'm sure that it's relevant, but I just don't know how much that impacts interpretation of their contract with you. I know in the regular world of contracts that, what's the commercial reasonableness of a situation is often defined by what the industry typically does. But, unlike you guys, which are creative people, Linden Labs' commercially reasonable efforts are what their world is really other technology businesses, which unfortunately for you is Facebook and Instagram and folks that are really kind of hostile to creative rights. So I don't know that how you do business is necessarily going to determine how we would interpret how they're doing business with you. But it's not to say no, because I really don't know. I think it's a valid point that that's all part of this.
I think they do not. I think the best thing that you would be able to argue is, look, I uploaded this, I set these permissions on it, and this should have been a message to everyone, including Linden Lab, that I wanted to limit rights in it, but you've already agreed to permit modification, to permit transfer, to permit copy. So I think that overrides the individual limitations that you can set after upload. I think that it would come down to whether or not you can argue successfully in front of a court if you get to court, or in front of an arbitrator if you get to an arbitrator. And you know, it's how much do you want to fight it?
Well, I guess I'll back up and say there are two different contracts too. I mean, how you deal with Linden is typically governed by the terms of service, as opposed to how you deal with other users in Second Life, which has a separate contract. So, you know, the starting point is no, they're unrelated, but you know, it's also unclear, I think, what the answer would be.
Interesting question. Under the old TOS, I would say that it did. But now I would say that it doesn't matter. Like in Facebook, the restriction of content to be viewed only by certain users like your friends could be a restriction that signals your intention that the content is not to be made publicly available. The permission system was similar, but now the grant under the new term is so broad, your restrictions mean less.
Exactly. And of course, with the license agreement being what it is, agreements made after or, you know, subsequent to the license agreement, the terms of service don't matter. So, yeah, I agree.
Well, and you know, the Facebook, when they did change their terms of service, I think it was before it was problematic for them to take just any content and use it for their advertising purposes, and so they changed their terms of service to make it okay. I don't know that we have an answer on whether, you know, ultimately how that works out. You know, it's the big world. There's plenty of FTC actions and other things that not everything's resolved, but I think the business side, they're trying to have less restrictions on what they can do with your stuff. I think that's just basically where the world's moving. You know, how that will work out ultimately, I don't know.
Next question.
Mary Wickentower asks, does any of this affect content or copywritten material that is not produced in SL, but that is advertised in SL?
I don't know. I don't know how broad it is. It's pretty damn broad. I would say that it affects the advertisement itself. And my instinct is no, it does not. And I would certainly argue that no, it does not. But I'm having a hard time figuring out a specific situation where what you're referring to. If you've got a specific question, please talk to us outside the panel.
I guess if I could pose a hypothetical, you know, let's say I have a website where I sell my creative works of authorship, and I happen to have a store in World, but I don't upload any of my content to Second Life. All I have is an advertisement that says, if you want to buy my stuff, go to my website, and here's a link. And so when you click on it, you go to it from outside of Second Life. I think that, you know, for you to issue a license to Second Life, you have to have user content. You have to fit within the definition of the terms of service. And your website's not in Linden Labs. I don't know that they can claim, well, I guess they can claim anything, but I don't know that they have a basis to claim ownership in your website's content. But, you know, if you upload samples, you know, that might be different. I guess it would really depend on what it is that you put in Second Life versus what you have outside, and what, you know, what's the overlap.
I'd say that depends on whether that advertised content was submitted to the service.
Because the user content in the terms of service says it has to be uploaded. in Second Life, published or submitted to or through servers, websites, or other areas of the service. So, if it really is just strictly an advertisement that says, "Hey, go to my website to buy something," I think that's different than if in your store I can get a copy of the thing that you're talking about.
Basically, I agree with Tim's comment.
Yeah, completely.
Next question.
Methild Vargon asks, is there a resource for consumers which offers a guidance and somewhat distilled information about the majority of social media that most of us use for the purpose of assisting us to know what these TOS agreements are saying and how potentially unfair they are? Many of us use various social media to promote our art, even some you mentioned we may not have known about, and are presumably there are others which are problematic that we should know about.
That's a very good question.
I don't know of any offhand. It might be the FTC publishes some stuff about this because they've litigated with Google and with Facebook. And there are agreements where those entities are supposed to do stuff, but more about privacy and less about IP. So I don't know. I couldn't say offhand I've seen one.
Yeah, I do, every year, I do a social media terms of use panel for the ABA, and we go through some of the major social media sites, terms of use, and take a look at them. But that's not, that's for the ABA. I think just being aware. I'm trying to think of anywhere that just sort of blogs them. Even the EFF doesn't really kind of go through and do that. I think that's probably something that maybe I should start doing. Why not?
Hey, it looks like we got a market
with VIPO. VIPO, I'm not going to paraphrase, so here we go. Consulting a lawyer is your right and responsibility. That's why VIPO was created, and I expect that each and every creator artist who has uploaded content in this world will now take advantage of our offer for free consultation. I'm going to post all of this in, including the link, so you do have a place to turn.
Outstanding. Thank you.
We
on to next order?
We have time for one more.
Okay. Toy Soldier Thor asks, the TOS refers to you, which has stirred a lot of debate. If one of my avatars agrees to the TOS and my others do not, who is you, the real-life person, or the scope of the avatar? Can a creator work as IP owner through the agreed rights of another user's avatar that did agree?
The account is defined as the contractual rights and obligations under this agreement associated with a particular account name. I would say, I don't know how account name is defined offhand. It says it's defined somewhere in here. It's an interesting question, though, if you have alts, who's bound and who's not. What do you think, Juris or Agenda?
Agenda, while you're contemplating, Juris has a response back to Mary, which really apply to a lot of people. I understand your frustration. It is difficult, however, to address specific legal questions in this type of setting. Please contact me or one of the others directly. Okay, Agenda.
Yeah, and that's I tried to say the same thing to Mary. Was if you have a specific question, please contact us directly. Yeah. You can IM us or probably send us a note card. As for this question, that's a really tough question. I think it's the individual. I think if you have agreed as one of your avatars, you've probably agreed as all of your avatars. I don't really have a concrete answer, but I think it's the individual.
Yeah, section 4.2 says you must choose an account name to identify yourself to Linden Lab staff in connection with your account, which may also serve as the name for your graphical representation within the service under this account, your avatar. The other practical thing is, if you had 5 alts, one of them logged in and accepted the terms of service, the other 4 never logged in again and avoided it. I don't know how they would ever get in to do anything. So the only one that ever would have agreed would have been the one that can get in and upload and download stuff. So I don't know that you got around it that way. But I guess I would read that as saying that they're really talking about your real life person identity as opposed to alts, and that some might be bound and some might not. But
Okay. Okay, Joy says, I've been waiting for that one. I think it would also apply based on your individual agreement made by the real-life account holder.
yeah, I think that it's tough to say it's any other way, because you would go to a real-life court to sue them. That would be you. It wouldn't be your alt. Your avatar can't appear in a California court to sue anybody. You're on the other end of that contract with them in real life, not in Second Life. So I don't know, having alternative avatars is a way around compliance.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, that is agenda. Can you take away your slideshow there for a bit?
Real
Behind
quick,
that.
If you have not had your question answered, I am putting them in a note card, the ones that were not covered, and I will send those to the 2 panel members. I was also given a link to an additional resource for helping people understand TOS information, and I'll post that here in just a sec.
Thanks, Max. Behind the stage here, you see the 2 big picture frames. One is a group joiner for UCCSL. The other is a group joiner for SL Bar Association. We are going to be working very closely with them in our future activities. We do have some things planned. I know that some of you have seen the letter that we're sending to Linden Lab asking for a meeting with them. We're going to be hammering out some wording that we're going to discuss with them regarding the terms of service, but basically take us back where we were before August and bring back 30-day notice is where we're looking at right now, but that's going to be tweaked, I'm sure, as we sit down and talk to jurists and some of the attorneys at the SL Bar Association. If you remember in Agenda's presentation at the end, she said there was like 3 ways we can go about this. One is, peaceable resolution. The other one is going to court. And then the other was a little more aggressive. I know that I think some of you, because we've been very careful about being professional and being very organized, have perhaps seen the UCCSL is maybe not taking a powerful enough stance, but I'll let you know that we are actually looking at fairly more aggressive methods of dealing with this. You will learn more about that. I encourage you to join the group, get into our different guilds. Take a role. We need help. We need your help. We need you to work. We need you to get out and get people into the group. One of the things that we are looking at is failing hearing back from Linden Lab is that we will probably begin contacting those state and federal government agencies and just making them aware. So unless anyone on the panel has something to offer, I would like to thank you so very much for being here. As you can see, I think the reaction has exceeded your expectations. So yeah, we're very passionate about this. And thank you so much.
Well, you guys are welcome, and we're happy to be of service. Feel free to reach out to us if you have other questions. And we were talking about doing this a second time. It sounds like there's a lot of people that couldn't join us in person, or I should say in Second Life, but have been following us elsewhere. So if there is still ongoing interest, then we can maybe try and reschedule another time. So.
Just so you know, that broadcast is being saved as an MP4, so as soon as we get that, we'll get it out to our group.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. You guys have really dedicated your time to coming and listening to us yammer, and we will do our best to schedule another session so that people that couldn't make today can be here and ask their questions, and we'll do what we can to answer the questions that didn't get answered today.
Yes, in response to Sweet, please do pass on the information on Viabo to all the social media. Please pass on links to the CCSL group and Guildhall to all the social media. Getting that word out is critical. Do it in every way you can. Forums, articles, blogs, Twitter.